Gen Z is the future. That applies to your organization as well. And when you wonder, what's that? I'm talking about Generation Z, and how to recruit them. Of course, you need to know what kind of approaches you need, what kind of positions should your organization have, but also how to implement the whole situation, or how to implement measures to successfully recruiting Gen Z people. When you now wonder, well, of course we need younger people, or we need people who we can still professionally train and educate. But what exactly is Gen Z? Gen Z are the ones who are born between 1997 and 2012. So either people who just very recently joined the workforce, or people who are going to join the workforce within the next 4 to 5 years, most likely with an attitude where they know that there's a talent shortage, a workforce shortage, and there you are with your offer, which may or may not be successful. We just had the largest HR expos and the largest HR fairs, which took place in Europe, always in central Germany. We had one in Hamburg, one in Stuttgart, the one in September, and Cologne, the large one in Europe, is yet to come up. I delivered 14 speeches in 4 days, so it was quite a busy day, to say the least. If you do not hire Gen Z, you always have an issue. And absolutely anyone told me we have issues finding the right young talent. Either we do not find them at all, or they do not find us, or both. Or they say we find them, we talk to them, and then they say, well, thank you, no thank you. And of course you could now say, well, that's not a problem for me, because I can always hire people who are already trained. So I just hire someone who already has the degree or the training or the certificate, or any kind of training that is useful for your situation or organization or your industry. However, that of course comes with a price tag. When people know they are qualified, the price tag immediately adjusts, and you have to see that this will always affect your bottom line, the end of year profit, or the performance of the organization. Also, it sheds a certain light on your leadership, where people say, well, obviously you do not want to train people, so why should people actually work for you, when you openly say we're not interested in developing anyone anywhere, we just basically want to milk their skills to our favor, for our favor. The main principle should always be grow your own people, grow your own talent to sustainably be successful on the market. And today we're going to talk about the 3 main pillars of that success. Number 1 is you need certain preconditions. You need certain aspects which have to be there within your organization. And of course you will say, well, you're probably talking about job ads, and yes, but that's only a very, very small part. There are certain requirements. There are certain requirements your organization needs to have. However, of course, and I completely understand that if you now say, well, that's not a one-sided game. True. There are also certain requirements looking at the person you want to hire. And then, of course, we talk about how to implement that in your organization. So let's talk about which preconditions, which requirements your organization has to fulfill. So number 1 is you go down the route of being social media savvy. If you are not present on social media, when you just put the general job ad out there, you really should not be surprised that it has little to no effect, or you only find the leftovers who weren't hired anywhere else. And of course, now some people say, well, Niels, social media advertising is horribly expensive. It is. It can be expensive, which is why I always recommend that you use a professional agency. I can give you contact here. I'm not advertising on my podcast. So as soon as you have that done, you have an agency and they are able to do it for you. You give them a certain goal, they do the rest. If you say, oh no, we do it all by ourselves, here are the news, you don't. There are people who do this for a living, professionally. They do nothing else than social media advertising. When you think that you can do that on the side, besides your daily business, you are too self-obsessed. And please refrain from doing so, because the results will be horrible and you most likely will not admit it. It's called the sunken cost fallacy. Once you spend money with something, you're willing to spend more money on it, and you just say, it is how it is. No, you didn't use professional help here. So be social media savvy. Of course, you can say you opt for professional networking. You go into schools or into universities and you hire from there. Yes, of course, that might work, but you need professional networkers. You need people who can present in a very good way, in a very good manner. Excellent presenters, excellent networkers, and you also need to be authentic. When you people who are usually suit and tie people, and for the presentation in front of young people, you suddenly just get out your sneakers and your jeans and you step in front of them, people will realize that immediately. And also, authenticity needs to be part of your offer. When you tell people, in our business, we wear suit and tie in the office, and they will rightfully so ask, why? When you do not have an answer, you will lose these people. I give you an example. When, for example, someone says you should work in suit and tie or maybe at least a shirt and proper trousers when you work behind a bank counter. Why? Because there's strong scientific evidence that people sell more products and trust you more when you wear these clothes. However, when you are in an office with no client contact, why should you wear a suit and tie? Only to serve one of your very special and personal, completely random and arbitrary needs of a leader that most likely has never been trained professionally. I'll get back to that in a minute. If you ask people to give up their authenticity, they will give up on you. So always be aware that authenticity wins on all levels. In addition to that, you need learning offers. And learning offers means that proper learning offers are there, not someone reading out a PowerPoint slide that has been standardized for years. Someone who is a professional trainer, professional coach, holds the experience, holds the qualification, most likely external people. Very rarely and only from a very large certain size, you have internal trainers hired. Besides all that, you need to offer flexibility, and flexibility is related to a couple of aspects. So one of them is time. The second one, of course, is location. And we talk about work from home. And when you say, well, people who we train probably can't work from home, when people are not trained professionally in the beginning, they will not ask for that. And most likely you can train them from home if you want to. That, of course, does not apply to absolutely any position. When you work in avionics and you want to teach people how to build a plane, you can't do that from home and no one would ask you to do so. But besides that, besides the work from home, always consider the work from anywhere aspect. When someone says, I'm going to Spain for 3 weeks and the first week I'm going to work and the last half week I'm going to work and the weekend, 1.5 weeks in the middle, I'll take days off, that needs to be available. By the way, when you say, oh, no one offers that, that's a straightforward lie. There's always someone offering that. Work from home, work from anywhere are part of daily business. And please do not pull out the 1.5 articles where someone says, oh, they all call them back in the office. Most companies who call people back in the office only had interest that their shares and investment in office buildings do not go down the drain. So very important is work from home, work from anywhere has to be accessible to people as soon as it's remotely viable. In addition to that, it's EDI. And when you now say, well, I have never heard of EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Equity, diversity, and inclusion means that people from different backgrounds need to feel welcome in your organization. It's not only about male, female, and it's not only about people from the LGBTQIA plus community. And when you now say, well, I heard of the LGBT, that thing, but I don't know what the letters mean, then you have something to do right now. It's not easy to learn, but it's something you need to learn. So it is about quite a number of aspects. So of course it is about representation of male and female, but also of different ethnicity backgrounds, races, social background, of course, sexual orientation, sexual identity, gender identity, neurodiversity, mental health aspect, gender appropriate language in different languages most likely, and a sensible dealing with topics where people back in the day said, you know, when you just go to the production plant, it's a bit sexist there, but that's how our industry is. No, it's not. It's just you losing control over your people. So when you now say, well, that's an issue with us, then you know you have to work on that. People are not willing, especially young people are not willing anymore to accept random discrimination based on it always has been like that. And by the way, rightfully so. A special aspect, and as we have the English version of this podcast, I also do this in German, as you can probably spot by my charming accent. One aspect which especially applies when you want to get access to people who come from the UK or from the US and quite a number of other countries, when you say we offer a partial or full coverage of tuition fees, that is very attractive to many people because tuition fees only know one way and the way is up, which is of course deeply unjust towards the younger generation. And when they come from that background, people will consider you more when you have an attractive financial offer when it comes to tuition fees. These are the prerequisites, the conditions you need to meet only to be considered as a viable option as an organization where young people say, I could think of working for you. But however, we want to be unambiguously clear, it's not a one-sided game. As every coin has two sides, we now have to look at which conditions, which prerequisites does the person have to meet. And of course, the person needs certain skills. Of course, when you train people from the scratch, you most likely think, well, maybe they don't have these skills. And it's perfect when you say we are willing to train them. However, you always, when you hire people, do one step first, and that is always test for skills. That is something I learned very quickly. Always test for skills, not to turn people away when they don't have them, but to see where are we. Do we have to invest a lot of work to get the skills done, or do we have to invest just a bit of work to get the work done? So what skills do we already have? What skills do we need to qualify? When the skills are not there, always check, are people willing to learn? Some people do not have skills, but they are very convinced that they don't need them. Or people do not have skills, but they are convinced they have them. And that is a very tiring round of opinion versus opinion, back and forth, back and forth. I strongly recommend, and that's the phrase I always learned with my employers before I went to self-employment. There's a great phrase, and it's called, if in doubt, leave them out. You do not want to deal with people who just push their ego forward with no substantial knowledge or experience. However, after you did the always test for skills aspect, always check, number 2, are they knowledgeable in certain subjects? There are certain aspects which should just be there because it's too hard to train them. I give you an example. When you say we have a very specific clientele, which is probably as your clients highly educated, so you have a lot of email contact and they insist on getting things done in writing, and you have someone who's not able to write an email with less than 20 errors per 10 lines, you could of course say we re-qualify them in writing. However, that's a long route to go down. And of course you might say, well, there are different aspects. We could also do it via phone. Perfect. Then do that. But in some industries, that route is not available. When you, for example, work in public service and you have to write something down because it is a legal decision you took and you have to inform the citizens about it, people expect that you are able to write a letter with a minimum or no amount of errors. So step number 1, always test for skills. And step number 2, check if they are knowledgeable on certain subjects. And for me, nearly most importantly, number 3, do they have a humbleness? Are they humble? Humble, but targeted. Do they have something in mind where they want to develop to, so they have ambition, being ambitious but humble? Because the last thing you want to have in your organization are people who are not humble and think you have to offer them a career. The CEO of the Hala, which is the company that runs the Hamburg Harbor, one of the largest harbors in the world, a multi-billion euro enterprise, during one of the largest HR expos for talent development once said, if you're one of these people who say, I'm young, where's my career because you owe it to me, that is not what we're looking for. We are looking for people who invest their skills in the organization. That's a very important point here that he made. By the way, the same applies to people who say, oh, I went to a dual university and I studied plus working in practice, so I'm the next level of evolution. Hint, you're not. Many of these dual studies, and I'm not saying that dual studies are bad. However, many of these dual studies are led by people who give you a certain ego and tell you the world is waiting for you. And that kind of approach to life is not very healthy. So step number 1, always test for skills. Step number 2, are they knowledgeable in certain subjects you need, or are you willing to re-qualify them or additionally qualify them on these skills? Step number 3, are they ambitious but humble? That is one of the most important aspects here. When people think they know it all and they're only letting themselves down, they basically talk down to me saying, I am willing to come down to your organization working for you. Thank you. I'd rather keep the job vacant then. So be sure that the person meets these basic requirements. Of course, we now have to talk about how to implement that in an organization. First, your leaders need professional qualification. The reason is quite simple, and we have a shocking number, which I mentioned before. CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, did a study. 82% of all leaders hold no qualifications whatsoever for leadership. They never received any formal leadership training. If I would ask you, let's say you have certain machines and you produce a certain product, a certain item out of them, and I would tell you, look, I have these people, they have no qualification, but they are going to deal with your machines and produce something out of that. And by the way, the marketing campaign will be done by someone. They don't have a professional idea of marketing or any qualification, but they can Google marketing. So I think they can do that. And also when it comes to the legal aspect, like writing the proposal and everything, the person does not have any experience or qualification on the matter, but they're nice. So I think they should do that with no qualification. You would never allow anything of that to happen. At the same time, we are going to allow people to lead others with 0 minutes of qualification. 4 out of 5 leaders hold no qualification whatsoever. And you are wondering why people leave your organization. People do not leave organizations. People leave people. And the number one reason is leadership behavior. So you need to train your people properly, not by the cheap online course for $49, pounds, euros, whatever currency you buy them in. There are people who basically you need 2 main aspects. Number one is they need to have the experience. So that, actually 3 aspects. Number one, they need to have the experience. So that means they were a leader in the past. Number 2, they need to have professional qualification to show that they are up to date with leadership. When you have someone who said, oh, I've been a leader in the 80s and 90s and now for 20 years I train people, and we have many of them out there, they teach the same outdated stuff to people that they taught when they were in practice. But that is not how leadership training works. And that's why you need aspect number 3. They need to be professionally qualified trainers or coaches, not just someone with a big ego and a reasonably successful track record in the real world. Just because you did it by yourself doesn't mean you can train others. There's a massive difference if you work on a construction ground with white people, and there's a massive difference if you work on sea level with black people, different ethnicities, minorities, whatever. You need to be able to deal with that on a professional level, and it's not done by, I've been a leader in real world, so I know what I'm doing. However, especially in the English-speaking world, often this nepotism, cronyism, insider deals, where people just say, oh, I know someone who knows someone, and I just hire that person. Of course you do not succeed with them. And often people only do this to get someone in a cheap way, for a cheap price, and say, oh, we did professional leadership training. No, you didn't. You need to train your people properly, because if you just hire someone who does not have the experience or the skills or the qualifications, then they will do the wrong thing with your leaders. And then, by the way, it's getting even worse. So train your leaders professionally. Number 2, you need to offer professional training to all of your people, absolutely anyone on all levels. Professional training does not mean that someone internally reads out the PowerPoint. I told you that before. Very rarely, and only from a certain size, you hire internal trainers. Most likely you need external people. Pay them professionally, or you get people who have no clue and they're just desperate for bookings. And the third, and that's the most crucial one, but also the most difficult one, you need to meet the very fine line between adapting to the new needs of a young generation entering the workforce, but also remaining stable with the needs of the generation that's already in the workplace, and also the experiences you have with your business running successfully, probably for decades. If you only choose one of the two, and I give you the typical example which I meet in real world practice. Number 1 is someone says, oh, we're a conservative industry. We are very conservative, meaning you expect young people to adapt to anything they say because you claim you're a conservative industry. Most young people will say, thank you, no, thank you. That's not an attractive employer. It's not even an attractive industry. So just saying we're conservative and that's why you have to adapt to anything, no, people won't, and rightfully so. When you go the complete other way and say we have to adapt to anything that young people need, then of course your experienced people will say we're just doing things to serve young people, even if it's wildly wrong, and we call it modern. No, that's not modern, that's just stupid. So you have to meet the very fine line in between the two, offering an attractive workplace with flexible offers for young people, while at the same time remaining stable enough to serve the needs of the people already in the workplace and a probably successful business running for decades. And that, when you meet that fine line, then you will have a very successful and sustainably future-proof business. And I wish you all the best meeting that fine line, which I just mentioned. And of course, some people might now say, well, that's quite hard to meet, isn't it? Yes, it is, because otherwise you wouldn't talk about that. Feel free to, if you have any kind of questions, feel free to text me, send me an email. In the show notes of this podcast, you find my email address, which is nb@nb-networks.com. And you also find my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on there and text me there as well. Both is mentioned in the show notes of this podcast. The second aspect, when you now say, well, I'd like to talk live to you. Yes, we have live sessions at least once per month, available in English and German. So when you go to expert.nb-networks.com, acquisitionnetworks.com. I also put that in the show notes of this podcast. Then you will receive only one email per week every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content at free guarantee. And that one email contains, of course, access to what I published, because I also write articles on the matter, but also it gives you the details on when is the next live session and how to access it. There's the link in the email with no cost whatsoever. It's completely free for anyone who's reading and listening to what I do here. The third aspect, however, is the most important one. Apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspects that you obviously want to see in your organization. I wish you all the best doing so. So feel free to contact me 24/7. I'm always available for help. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.